take us through what the word atmosphere means in your thesis, and then we'll take
Yeah,
it from there.
like this is also another big problematic thing of my thesis. I deal with a lot of big words. So atmosphere
You do.
is actually also I use it very differently from we what we usually use it as, I have to say. So essentially what I'm using, like what I'm looking at is when you go into a room, I'm just gonna say like you go into the church, right? And let's say we are in England, we go to the church, Anglican church, we sit down. It has like this beautiful traditional Anglican kind of, old architecture. You have the typical pews, they're in a row, and then you have the altar, and then you have an organ and all these kind of things. So these are all parts of the service, right? And then once the organ starts playing and the priests are or like the chaplains are coming in, and everybody sits down, blah, 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 the ritual starts, right? And so some people say that they feel like there is a special atmosphere. Some people say like something is happening to them, and this is what interests me. So basically, what people are saying is very interesting to me. However, the theory I'm using kind of says there's always an atmosphere in every situation. You go, for example, not even a concert only, but you go to the office and you immediately know if like there's a problem because people act differently, right? Or like you go into like you chill with your colleagues in your office, and then suddenly the boss walks in and everybody's like silent and tenses or something because you're like, we don't want to have the chill conversations we have during our break with our boss. And there are hierarchies, there's kind of expectations. What are you supposed to do, what are you not supposed to say? How do you usually behave in a meeting versus in a service? So I'm basically saying like there's always an atmosphere. It doesn't matter where you are, but there's a religious atmosphere during a religious situation, which is coded religiously, but has like a kind of semantic frame. So we're like, during a service you expect some people's talking about God. You expect prayer. You expect, you're socialized to understand that you do specific things in a specific sequence. And there is a specific understanding of what the room should look like, what the place should, for example, smell like. So there are like these expectations, right? So when we now move to Japan, there are a lot of churches that kind of mimic traditional European or American styles. They were built by missionaries, for example, but they're also mostly smaller, very small. And the architecture is sometimes literally transported from other countries. So you actually have the churches that look very similar to other churches from foreign countries, or you have like modern type of churches that, are built by cool modern architects that have like, amazing architecture. I have one beautiful example that is the Sekiguchi Catholic Kyokai. They use like a huge cathedral, and it's beautiful. It's been built in the 60s. It's really pretty, but it has like from the outside just looks amazing. And then you walk in, it's like very modernist. It doesn't have like, it's a Catholic church, but it doesn't have like many pictures or anything. Yeah, it's very, for me, it's very gray and large. It's like a huge cathedral. So there's like a wide variety of churches in Japan, and many are small and they look like more like rooms or something. So that also interested me. I'm like, well, the architecture is very different in every, like, every church I've been to in Japan looks super different from the other ones I've visited, uh, in Japan even, but also outside. So there isn't this kind of typical Japanese church, you know what I mean? And there's also not that every, for example, Protestant church is like more modern, It really depends on the church, like basic on the location. So with this in mind, I was like, how can churches kind of create or constitute an atmosphere that is religious for people when they look so different, also when they're so small, and how does the social aspect tie into it? Because in Japan, I don't know if you know, but like Japanese society is very structured. There's a lot of pressure also, and there's like hierarchies are very important. Doing like speaking in this specific way when you talk to elders is very important. So, for example, we are probably the same age or on the same status, so we speak in a very, more chill way. But when I talk to someone who's a little bit older than me or younger than me, I talk differently. You know what I mean? So there's a specific way of talking, and it's structured through language, but it's also structured through behavior. So it's a very structured society in a way, and this also is important in the service situation, right? Because you have a priest or a pastor who are the leaders, then you have elders or people who are also leading people, you have the musicians, and you have the lay people. And I wondered how this kind of social structure translates into the church atmosphere. And then, yeah. So what I did was I looked at the production of atmosphere. So I asked people like, what does this church look like? Why does it look like that? And how is kind of atmosphere produced from your perspective? I mainly asked this pastors, and then I interviewed members who visited the church to understand how they perceive the atmosphere. So what is the reception? Like, what do you think of this atmosphere? What do you think of this church? What do you like about the service? And then I did photo analysis. So I took pictures of the service situations. So people sitting or standing or whatever, I took pictures and then later analyzed them and was like, what is happening here? Like, how do all the material aspects tie together? And the basic assumption that I have is that atmosphere kind of is constituted through different elements. So not only through materiality, but also like a church building or something, but also through the social framing of the situation and through your own psychological disposition, right? If you have a bad day, you'll probably not really like the service may be boring or something, but if you have a very, very good day, you might enjoy it a lot. And so you're like, well, today I felt God more or something. Or maybe if you are kind of feeling like you just want happiness, maybe you're more open to to what is happening in the church service from your own perspective. So I also did interviews asking people that. And then in between, the material, the social, and the psychological dimensions, I think I find what I consider atmosphere. And then because it's in a church building during a ritual, I'm like talking about religious atmosphere. Yes.
Now, I love how you've taken me on a journey to understand what atmosphere is. I suppose the question I have is most Christians, their way of communicating with the hierarchy, which is God, is through prayer and is through meditation. So while they're in that service, yes, there is medication, but obviously it's being championed by the one preaching. So I suppose the question I'm asking is the atmosphere the biggest element in terms of your findings, that element of prayer, or is it actually the service itself in terms of the singing of a hymn or the preaching? Because those are three separate entities that combine into one, or is it all three? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think everything that you just mentioned is important, especially from the perception of atmosphere. So people tell me, I really enjoy prayer. I enjoy conversing with God. I enjoy doing it together, for example. Then I have a lot, and I think this is very important because this is something I have the assumption to do with also colonialism. Music. Japanese people are obsessed with classical music, and like also like church music, and they always want to have an organ. Like only evangelical churches do not have an organ. Every single other church had an organ that I visited, and I think they tie like this organ, Western classical music to Christianity, which makes sense historically, of course. And so music was extremely important from the perception of atmosphere perspective. So people were like, we love the music. We love hearing the echo of the organ or something. And then from, I think, the production perspective, they, like the pastors or leaders, they would always say, well, it's important to connect to God. And they have like these theological ideas that also, preaching is very important, praying is important, bringing people to God is important. And so I think all these elements, they tie together. Or they get tied together in the service situation because everything happens and that kind of influences how the people perceive it. And if they feel very connected, for example, to each other, they say that the community is very important, right? Doing this together is the point that why we're here. We can always pray at home, but coming together, creating the situation where we are all together makes the difference. And that is why the atmosphere is so special. And so I think what strikes me the most is that in Japan, like singing was very important and also doing it together. These two things were super important from the perspective of the people participating. Yeah, I would say that prayer was also mentioned a lot, but it was mostly mentioned in connection to doing it with others. Yeah.
I guess the next question then, linking into the three, you've said that it was meant, these elements were mentioned. Um, to understand atmosphere, were they supernatural experiences that were also shared to say, actually, when we're in this atmosphere, one can hear God, I don't know, or one has had seen an angel. What was shared? I'm
Mm.
intrigued.
Yeah, yeah. So, these are all part of the like one dimension, the dimension of perception. So, or like reception of atmosphere. So, when I talk to people, they said, like one person said, when I go to the church and I sit here under this beautiful stained glass window, which is also something that people in Japan love, 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 and connect to Christianity. Is that they were like, well, I feel closer to God here, which makes sense, right? The church is high, the light comes from above, like materiality is very important in this aspect. They didn't say that, but they were like, when I sit here at the window, they were like, wow. And then there was another woman talking to me in an evangelical church actually, and they were like, they only rented the room, so it looked like from the 80s. It wasn't very pretty, but they didn't care because it's an evangelical church. So they were like, we hang out here and God speaks to us. In this community, God is speaking through the people, kind of, God's presence is here. And they kind of grounded this in the reason that they were together, doing it all together. They all had the same kind of evangelical mindset. And so they were like, well, God is with us and I hear God, and that is very important for me. So they were like these supernatural experiences with like they felt like their spirit was cleansed or something like that. Um in one church that is a Japanese indigenous church. It was kind of formed in the, well, I don't want to lie, like 1920s or something. I can't remember the exact date, but it was formed in like the 20th century by Japanese people who were like, well, you know what, you missionaries, they all fight and bicker about their own kind of, historical, dramatic, whatever denominations. We just form new ones. And so they kind of formed new churches in Japan. And one of these churches, I went to one of these churches that was founded during that time. So they have like Japanese ideas of Christianity and also like traditional Christian ideas. So they kind of mix it up. And they were, I would say, very charismatic. So they would also, pray in tongues all the time. And I was just like sitting there and wondering like what is happening, because I had never seen this before in a Japanese church. And it wasn't like a typical charismatic um kind of Pentecostal church, but it was more like a very small, also like kind of traditional church. Like it looked more Protestant and boring, sorry to say. But they were very kind of, spirit guided, I would say. They would, and so they were doing like speaking in tongues and stuff like that, and they were like saying that this was very important for them because they were speaking it through, God was speaking through them. So these kind of experiences, they also happened. But it wasn't like I assume, for example, that would I talk to people in like in German churches, they would probably talk very differently about their experiences. I think the Japanese people really focus a lot on coming together and doing it together, because Japan is such a community-driven um, country, and also because it's a minority religion and they only practice their religion when they're in the church. So one of my findings also was that, or like one of the basic findings that I had was that um, one of the functions of atmosphere is actually to kind of strengthen this communal bond and also communicate to others. We are Christian. This is where we do this. During the atmosphere, you felt like this is where they're home, kind of. And they cannot do this outside the church. So it's really hard to be Christian in Japan because you cannot do a lot of the things that Japanese people usually do, going to the temples, going to the shrines, buying like small talismans, stuff like that. And so I think the atmosphere really communicated this kind of importance of coming together and doing like kind of boundary making during that process and strengthening communal and denominational feelings.
Hmm. So from hearing, what you've stated there in terms of your findings, I suppose the question I have is, it sounds like it's more culturally influenced, and it sounds that there are colonial influences. And the example I think is the glass that you said, when they can see that, because that's more of a colonial thing. I think they used to do it in terms of the Europeans because they couldn't read, so they would draw stuff on there. So I wonder how that was educated across, because they see it as I am closer to God. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Greece, and you know their churches, they're on top of mountains. So I asked the question, I said, well, why are you on top of mountains, right? With your churches? And they said, it's because we are closer to God if we're
Mm,
on top of the mountains. So I
mhm,
suppose what Noma is trying to ask is, was anyone ever so honest to say, yes, we understand that this is colonial. It's not actually maybe in the biblical text itself, and this is what
mm,
we believe to be true because in our culture, also, this is what we do in terms of community, because it sounds as if there's more of a spirit of community
mhm.
rather than anything. Or maybe I've misunderstood, I'm not
No,
sure.
no, I think it's a very intelligent question. I do think that, and I'm still struggling a little bit with the fact that Japanese Christianity is still so Western from my perspective. Not every single church, of course. They're like they have their own like super amazing, great, big, like kind of organizations that are like 100% Japanese, and everything is in Japanese, but there's still like this Western kind of, I don't know, sub-organizations. I don't know. It's kind of, or like super organization, I would rather say. Like, there is this connection, for example, to foreign churches all the time. And I don't think that they reflect it as something like they do this because it's colonial. I don't think that they see it that way. Also, Japanese people also pride themselves on not never having been colonized, which is a little bit funny. But, it is something that they're like, well, we've always been like the West. That's the narrative, the nationalist narrative they have. Like they are also colonizers, right? They have colonized Hokkaido, they have colonized Ryukyu Islands, and then they've colonized Korea and Taiwan, and they are not really, it's a difficult situation. Also China, so Japanese people, they don't often reflect very well on their political um, situation. Um,
Hmm.
but I would say like Christianity in general in Japan is kind of seen as something foreign. People do not see Christianity as Japanese, even though there are people like, yeah, there have been Christians for 400 years or 500 years. There have been Christian churches in especially Nagasaki, so South Japan, for a long time. There is like the story of hidden Christians who were persecuted, and there is like a lot of Japanese Christian history. And there are
Hmm.
like proper Japanese churches that were built and made and founded in Japan, but still this taste of Western ideas and Christianity being non-Japanese still lingers all the time. So when I talk to Japanese Christians, they are like, I think they feel this connection to the foreign places, wherever that can be, either America or Europe or even Brazil, a lot because of this church connection, because of this, and also because Christianity is kind of this, has this idea that you're kind of connected to all your brethren everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I think this kind of, is part of it. So theologically, it's part of it, but it's also basically because Christianity is not really considered Japanese in Japan.
Mm.
And so, for example, there are like a lot of Japanese people who get married in a Christian church, but it's not really a church. It looks like a church, but it's not. It's like a chapel, and it looks like chapels or churches in American movies. They do this white wedding thing. So they
Mm.
really have this white, beautiful dress, and they go to this chapel and they get married. But it's not Christian, and they don't want to be Christians. They don't care. They just want the vibes.
Of course.
Right? And so this is the image that persists in Japan. So people still think, well, Christianity is your religion, Dunya, but it's not my religion. My
Mm.
religion or my culture is Buddhism and Shinto. And so when I speak to people who are non-Christians, they're like, well, Christianity doesn't belong to Japan. And this is kind of the tenor. This is the way that people see it. And so this this is something that Christians do reflect on in Japan. They want to challenge this problem. They're like, well, it's also Japanese, so they're trying to, introduce Japanese metaphors. For example, instead of speaking about bread, they talk about rise of, Jesus as the rise of life or something like that. And they're trying to write Japanese language hymns and all these kind of things, but it doesn't really work. There's still this image that Christianity is not really Japanese, and that kind of, I don't know if it's critically viewed, like if there is like a critical voice that's non-nationalist in Japan that, considers this a problem. I don't know. Like I don't see, like I'm not really that deep into like the theological discussions by Japanese Christians, But I think there's more like an interest of Christians who are like, well, we are like Christians, and so we are connected to the whole world, and this is a good thing. I don't think that they say, well, we were influenced by foreigners and we don't like it. It's more like it's a little bit difficult. The situation is a little bit tense, and sometimes unreflected, I would say.
Mm. No, I love your response. I suppose, going back to the point that you made in terms of how small the churches are, knowing Japanese culture, do you think, that's the influence there to say we maintain our culture by having a smaller church because this is how we do things, essentially. Our homes are built in this way in terms of structure,
Mm,
but what accommodate you outside? Do you think
mm,
there was a bit of an element? Obviously, this is not a part of your
mm.
research, essentially, but it's just a question.
You mean like for meeting with other people or in
Y-
general? Yeah.
Yeah, for meeting in general with other people, also where they meet, because you
Hmm.
mentioned that the structures weren't the same, they weren't uniform,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
I guess also the region where you went has their own cultural nuances that they
Yeah.
brought in
Mm,
inside, and you could essentially see, I'm assuming because I haven't seen them, but
mm.
you know, that's the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So I think like well Japanese culture you don't really go home and meet people there. It's very personal, very private. So I think a lot of like mm, meeting people and living out the community happens at church. So they have like thousands meeting at church, thousands meetings at church. They always have like after church talks. So when the church is over, they meet for coffee or something. Then they have like church events all the time, which is nothing that is typical Japanese. But I think it makes sense in Japan because Japanese people usually do not meet at home if they're not family or very close friends. So I think there is this part that the community only lives on in the church. And so the church and the service are where the identity is reinforced, where they experience this community feeling. And I think it's very different in other places. So when I was in Ireland for my au pair year, people were like, well, we'll just go and have coffee all the time. They meet at home and you become friends. And I think in Japan, of course, people become friends also outside of the church, but they usually do things at church. They have everything at church. So it's a very central place for community. And this is also very like in general in Japan, people do a lot of communal events in the community center of the community. For example, if you go, for example, I don't know, in a small village, you have a community place or like a shrine, and everything happens there because it's
Mhm.
the center of the community.
So then the question I will ask then is, what is so original about your research?
So for starters, I think there's not many research that focuses on atmosphere that is not theological or not phenomenological. So I really see a lot of researchers do kind of this how do people experience this atmosphere kind of research, which is interesting, but it's really hard to do with like social scientific methods. So like if I go to a church, I have my own ideas. I come there, I'm European, so like part European, and I come there and I'm like, well, I have these expectations and they play out. And then of course I can write like an autobiographical,
Mhm.
kind of account. And people can also tell me something about their feelings, but it's mostly centered on like very personal stories, and that kind of research is really hard to translate if you want to do like a social scientific research. So that's why I think my research changes the way we approach atmospheres because I include materiality and I include the social aspects and I make it like a three-dimensional research that looks
Mhm.
at everything at the outside, at the situation, at the people, and at the like I'm also looking at the psychology of the people as much as I can through interviews. So that makes it, I think, original. It doesn't really happen that often. People always like talk to people and they're like, well, they say it's a good atmosphere, and then that's it. And I'm like, well, but
Yeah.
why? Why
Hmm.
is it good? Why would you say it's good? Maybe because it's, because they meet their people, or maybe it's because. So I got a little bit frustrated with other researchers who are doing amazing work, but the approaches are just very different from mine. And then the
Hmm.
second part is that contemporary Japanese Christianity is so understudied. Nobody does that. Like some
Hmm.
theologians work on contemporary Japanese Christianity, but it's a very understudied minority religion in Japan. And when I was talking to my supervisor, he was doing atmosphere research in German Catholic churches. And I was like, well, we could also do like Japan, because like if we only do atmosphere studies in like European context, we don't know how they translate in other countries. So I bring Japan as like a new context, to also, say, well, the structure, like the social structure and like the society of Japan is very different from Germany. How is atmosphere there compared to Germany, for example?
Hmm. So how do you then contribute to the body of knowledge? What is the theoretical addition to the body of knowledge with your research in terms of
Mhm.
atmosphere and religion and Christianity, obviously in Japan?
So for one, I would say that my research shows that atmospheres actually are constituted by social material and psychological aspects. So it's not only how I feel, but it's also how the community I am with is structured socially, and it's connected to the place that we meet. It's connected to a specific time and place. So my best example is if you go to a church and you go there after the church service, you usually go drink coffee and it's totally fine. Like, of course, you still have these beautiful windows or something, but it's still a different atmosphere. Like, you can just talk openly. If you go to a service, you don't scream, you don't sing, but you would maybe do this later. So, because it's kind of, the situation is important, the social framing. So that is a contribution. And then I think my research, how do I say? It looks at Christianity not as like this foreign thing in Japan, but more say like I rather say like Christianity in Japan is a small part of the society, and that means that Japanese people that are Christian struggle with something. They struggle with this kind of disconnect between being Japanese and being Christian. And so I also show that atmosphere actually has the function of communicating boundaries to other people and to the group themselves. So through the atmosphere, you understand like what this group is about, how they reinforce their identity, but also how they, um, create boundaries to other groups, to other Japanese groups, but also to other Christian groups. So it's also a denominational kind of distinction.
Hmm. So now you've gotten to the end. What would you do so differently if you were to go through this research journey again in terms of your thesis, your data
Mm.
collection?
What I might do differently would be that maybe I would include a few more churches from like Pentecostal or like charismatic backgrounds, because I only have one. Then I might also structure the research a bit differently, because in the beginning, I was always asking people like, how do you feel? And I kind of disregarded in Japan. It's not really about saying what I feel, but it's more, it's like very communal country. So it's better to ask differently. And I had to learn that through my interviews. So I had to change my questions a little bit, which is fine. It's normal in the process of research, but maybe I would have changed that before and really thought about like, is this really a good question to ask a Japanese person that is in an interview? Or maybe I should ask differently. Which also shows that I was, socialized in Europe, and it's totally normal to say like, how do you feel? In Japan, it's not so normal. People don't really enjoy talking about their feelings that much with a stranger. Yeah, I think other than that, I wish I wouldn't have done it in the pandemic because it meant people were wearing masks and everything. So it did change like my experience a little bit, but it wasn't bad. Mm, and I also I would have liked like we tried to make this a collaborative project between different like with like three different sub-projects, but it didn't work out. And I would have loved to see if that would have worked out, how our results would have been, how to, you know, compare our researches with each other, the findings with each other, because like in the end it was only me. I was only doing the only like I was doing my research, but there was supposed to be like another person, but the funding didn't go through, so now it was just me. And I was like, oh, it would have been so cool if we both would have done something similar and then compare our results and find like meta results that say more about atmosphere and production. And
No, I love that. And to go to our audience at home, most people are in first and second year, and they're thinking to do something similar to you. And we know that there's governance in terms of data collection. What guidance do you have for them in terms of applying for an ethics approval to go to Japan or the US or India, wherever
Hmm.
they want to go?
Hmm.
What guidance would you give them in terms of the application from?
I think so. This is something we don't have to do in Germany. I have to say we don't have this
Oh,
ethics. No, we don't.
I must move
Uh,
to Germany then. I'm in the wrong country.
it's pretty like if you don't do like any like crazy kind of things, you're like nobody cares. You can just, do your research, and data security is very important. So that is something very German. Your data security. Um, so what I would recommend is always also take into consideration the people you're interviewing and make that or like talk about that and reflect about that. Like, what does it mean if you go to them, their private places or their churches, and you talk to them and you ask a lot of them. Like, reflect on that and also use this in your application and talk about the ways that you want to approach the people that you interview, the ways you want to maybe give something back. But these are only the only things I can really say because we don't have this kind of, uh process in Germany. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's really good advice because you are speaking to humans, like you said. One of the learnings, key learnings from your research was that you realize culturally they don't really want to speak to a stranger about sensitive information. And to them, sensitive information is that atmosphere, which
Yeah.
is what you were after,
Yeah.
essentially. And they were like, oh, I don't want to share. So,
Yeah.
it's good to understand the culture that you want to go into in terms of the communities that we conduct the research in. So for me, no, that's amazing. Now to the most important part, which I'm sure when you go through your defense, they will ask you in terms of your methodology. How many people did you speak to, and why was that the right number for your
Hmm.
research?
How many people? Oh no, I have to count. I went to 9 churches and I spoke
Mhm.
to 2 to 4 people. So let's say 27 people maybe. I'm not really
Wow.
100% sure, but
Yeah.
like some of the interviews are really short because like when I say like what do you like about the service, they're like I like the music, and I'm like okay, so why? And they would
Yeah.
say it sounds nice, and I felt like they don't
Mm.
want to say it, or maybe they didn't
Yeah.
know. And I think it's also a very important finding. Sometimes they had no idea what the hell I asked them, and I'm like it's kind of confusing, but it makes a lot of sense because the atmosphere is implicit, you don't really
Yeah.
reflect on it all the time.
Hmm.
So that was also like the silence was a big answer for me. So I was like, okay. And I think I talked to lay people, I talked to
Hmm.
leaders, and I tried to balance that. And I think that was great. So
Hmm.
for me, I do think that I have a good balance of people, and it is enough. I mean, you can always ask more people, but I felt like after a few churches, I understood every church is different, and the ways that the people talk about the atmosphere is obviously tied to theology and also tied to the denominational specifics of the church, but they were like on the meta level, there were more like, similarities that I could find after doing like a few analyses. I was like, oh, So I feel like 27 people was good, but most interviews were under 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Some were 15 minutes, some were 20. One was like an hour, but mostly they were very short. Yeah.
No, I love that. We'll move on to the questions that I've received from the internet, from people just asking for guidance. The first one is conferences. Do you think attending conferences is a good way to get into the market in terms of networking, or do you think actually just concentrate on your thesis during your PhD and just get it over the line?
I highly recommend going to conferences and presenting a research. I think it's one of the most important, also really difficult things to do as a researcher, but it's very important to show what you're doing and to let people see the progress. So if you can go to conferences and also only maybe present one small thing of your thesis. You don't have to present everything, but show them what you're doing and then engage with people who are important in your line of research. I think this is so beneficial. I've learned so much on conferences. It's also tough sometimes. And you shouldn't, go to every single conference you can,
Mhm.
but maybe go to one or two a year if you can get funding would be great to just engage and show I'm doing this research. Maybe hire me in 5 years.
Hello.
Hello.
No, no, I love that. And the next question then is should PhD or DBA researchers feel pressured to publish during their PhD journey or DBA journey? Because, well, I can only speak of the UK. There is a bit of pressure. Everyone's trying to publish so they can get a job when they finish.
Yeah.
Or would you say no, Norma, it's not a thing?
Thank you. I think this question is really hard. So I did publish a few things while doing my PhD, but it really meant that I was not really working with PhD during that time. It takes away from your time. So it is difficult for me because I know people who haven't published anything and they really struggle finding a job. So personally, I would say find a good balance. Maybe try to publish one or two things during a PhD. If you're not doing like a cumulative, do you say that? I don't know, cumulative. Like you in Germany, you could write a book, or you can like do a PhD by publishing papers.
Mhm.
And if you're doing like writing a book, maybe try to publish one or two things at the side,
Mhm.
but focus on your PhD because then you will definitely be faster. Uh, but I heard both advice, like both sides. I heard people saying don't publish, and I heard people saying publish. And I'm really glad I did publish a little bit because I followed my supervisor's advice, and they were like, you should publish a little bit. It helps to show and promote your research before you're doing a PhD. But don't publish the most important parts, of course, but publish something
Mhm.
on the side that is kind of close to what you're doing. That now helped me, to get other kind of cool like opportunities and talk to people from other fields or something as well. So that was nice. Um, yeah, publish a little bit, maybe.
No, I love it. And the next question then, in terms of women in academia, I've had some guests as well who've expressed their heartbreak towards, the lack of attention to when they want to start a family during a PhD. Should they get pregnant and they don't know how they will actually survive because obviously they have to go on maternity, then come back. But if you
Mm-hmm.
work in labs, for example, the project must keep going, right?
Yeah,
So then you
yeah.
feel like you're far and behind. What are your thoughts in terms of our challenges as women in academia?
Mm. There are, I think, different kinds of answers you could give to this question, but I do think that if you want to start a family as a researcher, do it whenever you feel ready. Like, don't let academic ideas kind of dictate what you can do. I think it is such a high contingency kind of workplace. And so if you feel like you want to start a family and you feel like it holds you back, like if your PhD holds you back, don't. Just, do whatever you want to do and what you think is right. Because it's never the right time for children. Everybody says that, right? And that is so true. And I think I heard like in Germany people say it's a good time to get pregnant during your PhD because then you can take time off. You're not already in this kind of you have to find funding kind of game. So if you are lucky and you have a job and you can do it during a PhD, it's great because you get maternity leave paid and also paternity leave paid. But if you can't or like if you're already done with your PhD, just go with it. You know what I mean? So
Um,
it's hard either way. Um, both parenthood, but also being in
mhm.
academia. So I think follow what you want to do. I think that would be my advice because this system it's not made for us in a way, like especially in Germany where like it's really also like you cannot work at university for such a long time without getting like a permanent position because then there's kind of a law that prevents you. So there's kind of this pressure to get things done and to get funding. And so you would never have the time to get children. So I would just say do it whenever you feel ready and don't let academia dictate you anything. Yeah.
Hmm. I suppose the next question is to do with diversity, equity, and
Mm.
inclusion. And there's a lot of movement in terms of, oh, we need more brown people, whether darker, lighter, whatever you want to call them, black, different shades. And, organizations are bringing in these individuals who will focus on women. And again, there's now an element of tokenism. They don't know what they're doing. And some of them are being bullied, harassed, and other things. Others are thriving, don't get me wrong. Others can't do the job and others can. Right. So I suppose the question that I'm asking is, do you think it's good that we are boxed as a nation, and I'll say all brown people in that sense? Because for me, my opinion is, if you don't know what I am, I'm not boxed, so I can do whatever I want. But the minute you put me in a box, now I've got restrictions. You tell me when I can succeed, you tell me when I can't, right? So what are your thoughts in terms of that?
I'm not sure if I can answer so well, but I would always say, like, anybody who wants to be in academia should get a shot. And like, in Germany, we have this thing that people are like, I think the tokenism here is with people who look like me, who have a name like me, because it's not German. And so there is this risk of becoming like we say Quotenausländer, which is like the kind of token foreigner with like, even though I can only speak German, like my Japanese is a million times better than my Farsi because I don't speak Farsi, which is my dad's language. But still, like, looking like me, having my name is something special. And there are not many people like that in Germany in university. And there's even a greater lack of people who are black or from like Southeast Asia or something, like Asians in general. Like, it's very Caucasian, I would say, in Germany still, which is a huge problem, I think, because we need diversity. We need different perspectives. We need people with different experiences, both like from a class kind of perspective, but also from a diversity kind of perspective, from the journeys of life we've done, because it changes the way we look at things. And I think it really needs to change. I don't think we need, like, I hate boxes, so everybody can do anything, I think. you know. And so of course, like, when going to Japan as a German raised girl or woman, but then also not being 100% German, but also being always read as a European, it's kind of like, I also felt like Japanese also, like, Japan is a little bit racist. And so when you're there, you're a foreigner, you can never be Japanese. And I'm like, I don't want to be Japanese, it's fine for me. But still, like, they also have these boxes, and I'm like, it really makes it hard to just do whatever you want. And also, I don't think I have to be Japanese to study Japan. I can learn the language. It's a language. I would never say that you cannot study, for example, whatever, Germany, if you're not German. It makes no sense to me because this cultural, is weird. So I think we need a lot of different people in academia. We need a lot of different perspectives, because theory making and the way that we look at the world is influenced by the way that we were raised and the way that we live. And that is way too wide at the moment in academia. So there's just, I think nothing comes from having the same all the time. We need change. We need fresh ideas, wherever they're from.
Yeah, I really love your response, because yes, I may say we don't want to be boxed, but the actual reality is we need governance and legislation to get us to a point whereby we can then start making that statement. And it is actually a journey. It will take a bit of time for us to get there. To your point as well, when I travel to certain spaces in Africa, for example, I don't fit in, and I try and fight and argue in terms of how African I am, and yet I am not accepted. Then I come home, it's the same. So it's like, where do I fit in? Right, okay, I'll do my research then, do a PhD.
Yeah. Which is good. But I think it's exactly this, you're kind of stuck between, and you're like, you're not one, you're not the other. And that is a win, I think. It's great that you can see different things and that you've experienced different things, because we have the same, like, we in Germany, we always quote the same three sociologists from, like, I don't know, France. Like, this is so old. Like, we need new things. The society today is different. And we need other people with other perspectives to challenge this. We're still talking about Weber all the time. Like, he has ideas, but there are people with other ideas as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I think with academia, one thing I've come to observe is that if you get it right in terms of what's known as the norm, then later on you may try and introduce something new. But even then, at that, there's still a bit of friction, like you're saying, because we have names. And we know those names, like in psychology, we can name them between me and you. Right, because that's all we know, and we've known that all our lives, and it takes time to change the status quo. But you'll be glad to know we are at the end of our conversation. The final question is, do you think PhD Hard Talk, as I've invited you onto this platform, is beneficial for the communities in which we conduct our research in, for universities alike, and for ourselves as researchers? Or do you think, no, Noma, it's not working? What are your thoughts?
Thank you. No, you're doing a great job. I think it's very important. It's great to not only being able to talk about these things, but also reflect on your own research, reflect on other people's research, and understand that through these kind of formats, people are seeing that research is becoming more diverse. I think it's becoming more focused on understanding how different societies and cultures work without having this kind of old glasses on, seeing it also from the same perspective all the time. So I think it's a very beneficial program, very beneficial formats, very interesting to see different people and their journeys. I love hearing about other people's journeys into academia because it just gives me a lot of confidence that we all have different life stories, but we come here and we want to find something out about this world, and this connects us like across the topics, across the different disciplines, which makes it so exciting. And I think for universities, they should look at this. They should read, like hear and read about PhD Hard Talk to understand how younger researchers are becoming full researchers, full researchers, like, who walk this journey with like different kind of biographies, and they're making, a difference in the world, I think. And that is something that university academia that they need.
Thank you very much for your time today. And if you would like to get in contact, details will be at the bottom. But for anything else, if you don't get a response in 24 hours, please don't be mad. A PhD is tough, and applying for jobs is a 9 to 5. So please be patient at home. Thank you so much again for your time. I've learned so much about the atmosphere and religion and Christianity, and also in terms of that cross-pollination of culture, from the Western to Japan, and also understanding of what it is to be in an atmosphere. I think, you've educated us very well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.